All right, let's jump right into things today. We've got a whole stack of news to get through, global events that are, well, kind of concerning, but also potentially hopeful.
A bit of a mixed bag.
Exactly. We're going to be talking about Trump stirring up trouble on the world stage again.
Of
It's
course.
like we can always count on that, right? We're also going to look into some possible power shifts in the European Union. Oh, and Russia trying to wiggle its way back into, the global community after all those sanctions.
Always a fascinating development.
And to top it all off, we've got a migrant crisis unfolding in Panama.
A lot to unpack there.
Definitely. And it's really important, I think, to understand these events, especially their impact on, well, on people, the ones who are most vulnerable. But don't worry, we've got you covered. To guide us through all of this, we have our expert here.
Happy to be here.
So, shall we just dive right in? Let's start with Trump and Zelensky.
All right, let's do it. Trump calling Zelensky a dictator publicly. Well, that's causing quite a stir internationally.
Not exactly subtle, is he?
It goes beyond just personality clashes, right? I mean, this is happening while Zelensky's trying to, start those peace talks with Russia, which is already a tough task.
Right, and it's not like Zelensky's just ignoring it either. He actually directly addressed Trump's comments.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, questioning, Trump's understanding of the whole conflict. It really feels like it's more than just a war of words at this point.
It certainly suggests a breakdown in diplomatic communication, which history tells us can have pretty big consequences. This isn't just disagreeing, it's a lack of trust, a lack of that mutual respect you need for any kind of meaningful conversation, let alone trying to resolve a conflict.
And just to add another layer of complexity to this, we have to remember that, well, Trump isn't even in office anymore.
Right, adds a whole other dimension to it.
What does all this mean for Zelensky? I mean, he's leading a nation that's kind of stuck between these two powerful figures. It's like he's walking a tightrope.
Right. Yeah, he's in a really delicate position, trying to, on one hand, assert his nation's autonomy, and on the other, pursue peace, all while facing pressure from both sides. It's a high-stakes game, and the outcome could have big implications, not just for Ukraine, but for, well, the whole geopolitical landscape.
Yeah, that's a great point. So speaking of delicate situations, maybe we should shift our focus to the European Union.
Sure. What's happening there?
Well, it seems like Germany's stirring up some trouble internally. There's this far-right nationalist leader who's pushing for changes,
I've heard about this.
and they seem to directly challenge the EU's commitment to, democratic principles.
Yeah.
And it's not just a fringe movement either.
No, it's gained some traction. Over 20 other EU countries have actually spoken out against it, criticizing Germany's stance and even calling for a review of their leadership.
Whoa, so this could actually fracture the EU.
Yeah.
It makes you think, could this embolden other far-right movements across Europe,
Yeah.
especially with all the upcoming elections?
It's definitely something to watch. This isn't happening in isolation. It's part of a bigger trend of rising nationalism and populism in Europe. We need to pay attention to how this might affect voters and political alliances in the coming months and years.
Okay, so we've got Trump and Zelensky at odds, the EU potentially fracturing, feeling overwhelmed yet. Well, hold on tight, because we're going to delve into a story that's both, well, intriguing and kind of concerning. Russia's trying to get back into the good graces of the global community.
Russia. Always keeping things interesting.
Right. So the Kremlin, still facing those heavy sanctions, they've proposed this financial aid package. They say it's to support Russia's potential reintegration into international relations. But here's the thing. The details are super vague.
Interesting.
Yeah, we don't actually know the specific, like how much money, what the conditions are, who's going to get it. It makes you wonder, is this a genuine attempt to make amends? Or just a way to, get out from under the sanctions without actually changing anything?
It's a tough call. The key factor here is trust. Can the world trust Russia's motives? Will they demand real actions, real proof of change before easing up on those sanctions? It'll be fascinating to see how everyone, especially the countries most affected by Russia's actions, respond to this.
Absolutely. Okay, before we get too lost in this world of international power plays, maybe we should turn our attention to something that's, well, a lot more human, a lot more concerning on a personal level. The migrant crisis happening in Panama.
Right, a very different kind of crisis.
Thousands of migrants, many of them seeking asylum. They're being held in these makeshift camps out in the jungle. The conditions are rough, limited shelter, the threat of diseases breaking out. They're fleeing violence and hardship only to end up, well, trapped in a different kind of struggle.
These camps are a stark reminder of the human cost of conflict and displacement. I saw some news footage, a bus arriving at night, its headlights illuminating the faces of these people, men, women, children, just exhausted. And their expressions, it was a mix of hope and desperation. It really makes you think about the individuals, the families, the dreams behind the statistics.
It really does. And it makes you question how we, as a global community, are responding to this. Are we doing enough? Are we providing safe haven for those fleeing danger? Are we even addressing the root causes of this displacement, the political instability, the economic hardship?
Those are the real questions, and honestly, the answers are complicated and often disheartening. This situation in Panama, it's like a microcosm of a much bigger global crisis. It shows how our systems are failing to protect the most vulnerable. It's a sobering reminder of the work that needs to be done.
It's heavy stuff, but it's important that we face these realities. And before we move on, maybe you could tell me what stands out to you the most about all these stories.
What strikes me is how interconnected everything is. From the political clashes to these humanitarian crises, the economic sanctions, the plight of these migrants, it's all linked. It's a reminder that we're all part of one big system, and what happens in one place can have ripple effects all over the world. Our choices have consequences.
That's such a powerful point. And it's a perfect segue to the next part of our deep dive, where we'll explore what all of this means for you, the listener, and how we can navigate this complex world. Stick with us. So back again. Had a moment to, digest all that. It's a lot, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely a lot to take in. We've gone from those political clashes to, international power struggles to this heartbreaking migrant crisis. Honestly, it can feel pretty overwhelming. How do we even start to make sense of it all without getting, lost in the chaos? Well, it's natural to feel overwhelmed, especially when faced with, this level of complexity. But I think the first step is just acknowledging that feeling and then maybe shifting our perspective a bit. Instead of seeing these events as isolated incidents, what if we look at them as pieces of a bigger puzzle?
Okay, I like that. Looking for those connections, those patterns, the underlying, currents that drive these seemingly separate events. But how do we actually do that? Where do we even begin?
Well, one starting point is just staying informed. Make a conscious effort to engage with the news, even if it's just a quick skim each day. Think of it like checking the weather forecast. You might not be able to control the storm, but knowing it's coming helps you prepare.
That's a great analogy. But it's not just about passively absorbing information, right? We need to actively engage with it. Develop our critical thinking skills, question our assumptions, and be wary of all that bias and misinformation out there.
Exactly. It's about going beyond just accepting everything we read or hear at face value, developing a more discerning approach to information. Ask yourself, who's presenting this information? What are their motivations? What perspectives might be missing? This kind of critical thinking, it helps us form more informed opinions, helps us make more conscious choices.
So it's like a mental workout for our brains.
Yeah.
The more we challenge ourselves to think critically, the stronger our analytical muscles get. But sometimes, let's be real, all this global turmoil can be incredibly disheartening. It's easy to feel powerless, in the face of such huge challenges.
I get that. That feeling of powerlessness is totally understandable. But it's important to remember, even small actions can make a difference. We don't have to single-handedly solve every problem or change the world overnight. Instead, focus on what you can do within your own sphere of influence.
You mean those butterfly effect moments, like maybe donating to an organization that's helping those migrants in Panama, or writing to our elected officials about policies that impact, international relations.
Exactly. It's about recognizing you have agency. Your choices, your actions, they can contribute to positive change. It might feel like a drop in the ocean, but remember, oceans are made of countless drops. Collective action, it starts with individual initiative.
I love that. We each have a role to play, no matter how small it might seem.
Yeah.
But it's not just about individual actions, right? There's also a collective responsibility to push for bigger systemic change.
Absolutely. We need to hold our leaders accountable. Advocate for policies that promote peace, justice, sustainability, support those organizations that are addressing these global challenges on a larger scale. It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected. The choices we make, individually and collectively, they shape the world we live in.
Okay, so we've got awareness, critical thinking, individual action, and collective responsibility. But there's another really important element here: empathy. It's easy to get caught up in the whole, geopolitical chess game, but we can't forget about the human stories behind all these headlines.
You're so right. Whether it's those families of the captives in Gaza, or the migrants seeking refuge in Panama, or the people in Ukraine caught in the crossfire, these are real people with real lives, real hopes and dreams. It's easy to become numb to the suffering when we view it from a distance, but empathy, it allows us to connect with the human experience behind the statistics.
It's about recognizing our shared humanity, understanding that these events aren't just abstract news stories, they're realities impacting the lives of individuals, families, entire communities. It's about seeing ourselves in their struggles, their aspirations, and understanding that their well-being is connected to our own.
And empathy can be such a powerful motivator for action. When we connect with the human stories behind these events, it becomes much harder to ignore the injustices, to stay passive in the face of suffering. It pushes us to act, to speak out, to reach out, to make a difference however we can.
So as we're wrapping up this part of our deep dive, let's just take a moment to reflect. We've explored these really complex international relations, the challenges of this rapidly changing world, and how important it is to engage with these issues thoughtfully, compassionately, and proactively. But here's the thing. This is just the beginning of the conversation.
Exactly. We've given you some food for thought, some tools to navigate this complex world. But it's up to you to continue the journey. Stay curious, stay engaged, and never underestimate the power of your voice, your actions. You can make a difference.
And remember, you don't have to have all the answers or solve all the world's problems. It's about taking those small steps, staying informed, continuing to learn and grow. Now, before we move on to our final segment, here's a question to think about. In a world that often feels so divided, so uncertain, how can we foster a sense of global citizenship? Where we recognize our interconnectedness and work together to create a more just, sustainable future for everyone.
Big question. But it's one worth asking. And maybe in our final segment, we can explore some potential answers together.
Okay, so we're back and ready to dig into our final topic for this deep dive. This one really caught my eye because it's about something that doesn't always get enough attention, with all the political stuff and economic headlines. Food security.
Yeah, it's crucial. And it's becoming even more urgent now because of everything that's been happening lately. There are all these factors converging, putting pressure on, global food systems. And Russia's role in all this is, well, pretty significant.
Right, Russia. So they've been hit hard by those sanctions. We know that. But how does that tie into food security? I mean, they aren't the only ones producing food, right?
True. But they're a major player in the global food market, especially when it comes to wheat. They're one of the biggest exporters. So any disruptions to their agricultural sector, well, those can ripple through the whole supply chain. Imagine a key ingredient suddenly becomes scarce. It impacts prices, availability, even accessibility, especially for the people who are already struggling.
So we could be looking at more food insecurity, higher prices, maybe even shortages in some places. That's kind of scary.
It's definitely a concern.
So what can we do? What can be done to, lessen these risks?
It's going to take a multi-pronged approach. One thing is diversifying food sources. So we're not so reliant on one country or region. Investing in sustainable agriculture practices is huge too, making things more resilient to climate change, and other disruptions, and of course, international cooperation. Got to make sure food resources are distributed fairly and prevent hoarding, price gouging, all that.
Sounds like a huge task. But I mean, the stakes are really high.
They are.
We can't just ignore these challenges.
Yeah.
Especially when, so many people's well-being is on the line.
Absolutely. This isn't just about economics, food security. It's about human rights, social stability, global security. It's a fundamental part of creating a just and sustainable world.
Okay, so ready for our last topic?
Hit me with it.
It's one that everyone's been talking about, but it's important, we can't just sweep it under the rug.
Yeah.
Climate change.
Yeah, that's the big one. Can feel kind of overwhelming, almost paralyzing how urgent it is, how huge the problem is. But that latest report from the International Panel on Climate Change, well, it's a wake-up call. No more time for complacency.
The report doesn't exactly paint a rosy picture of the future, does it?
No, not really. And it's not just, rising sea levels and crazy weather. It's so much bigger than that.
Right.
Climate change, it's like a threat multiplier. It makes existing problems worse. Poverty, conflict, displacement, it impacts everything. Food security, water resources, public health. It's a global crisis that needs a global response.
So what do we do? Should we focus on individual actions, like reducing our carbon footprint?
Yeah.
Or is it more about systemic change, like switching to renewable energy, holding corporations accountable?
It has to be both. We need people making conscious choices in their everyday lives, and we need governments, businesses, everyone to step up and make real policy changes. Prioritize sustainability, reduce those greenhouse gas emissions.
It's like we're all on this huge ship heading straight into a storm. We can either just sit back and hope for the best, or we can all grab an oar and try to steer ourselves to safety. But we got to row together, in the same direction if we want any chance of making it through.
Love that analogy. Really drives home the point about collective action. The longer we wait, the harder it gets, the more it'll cost to fix things. We're at a turning point, and the choices we make now, well, they'll affect generations to come.
So that's it for our whirlwind tour of global events. From all those political tensions and economic uncertainties to the humanitarian crises and, well, the elephant in the room, climate change. It's a lot, but hopefully you've gained a better understanding of, well, how interconnected everything is and the challenges we all face together.
Exactly. We've given you some things to think about, some tools to navigate this complex world, but it's up to you now. Stay curious, stay engaged, and remember, you have the power to make a difference.
Never underestimate that. The power of hope, of collective action, of the human spirit. We're all in this together. And together we can create a better future.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep exploring.